Eleanor Pierce agrees to a loveless marriage of convenience with widower Augustus Montgomery to escape financial ruin, never expecting to pierce the armor around his grief-hardened heart. But as their arranged household slowly transforms into something genuine, will she discover that the greatest wound isn't the one that comes from betrayal, but from refusing to risk love again? A teacup shattered on the wooden floor, the crash mixing with the howl of the January wind. Eleanor Pierce froze mid-step, watching her mother's last good china break into jagged pieces, much like her hopes for the future. "That's 7 years bad luck," called the neighbor's boy through the window, his face pressed against the frosted glass. "That's mirrors, Tommy, not teacups," Eleanor corrected, brushing back a strand of chestnut hair that had escaped her practical bun. She shooed him away with a weak smile before kneeling to gather the broken pieces. The bitter cold seeped through the gaps in the floorboards, numbing her fingers as she collected the shards. 26 years old, and this broken teacup might as well be her life. Once pretty and useful, now in pieces too small to fix. The bank notice on the table seemed to grow larger by the minute. Bold red letters spelling final notice drew her eye no matter where she stood in the tiny front room. 2 weeks. Just 14 days before Sheriff Davis would come with his sad eyes and official papers to put her out of the only home she'd ever known. Father's gambling debts had dried up faster than a summer puddle after his passing, leaving Eleanor with nothing but a tarnished family name and skills as a seamstress that barely kept food on her table. The ladies of Willow Creek still brought her their mending, but always with pitying glances and hushed whispers that stopped when she entered a room. When the heavy knock rattled her front door, Eleanor's heart jumped to her throat. Had the sheriff come early? She squared her shoulders, determined to face her fate with dignity. But the man filling her doorway wasn't Sheriff Davis. Augustus Montgomery stood tall against the gray winter sky, the collar of his dark wool coat turned up against the cold, his wide-brimmed hat clutched in hands that had built the largest cattle empire in the county. Snowflakes gathered on his broad shoulders, melting into dark patches on the expensive fabric. "Miss Pierce," he said, removing his hat. His voice was deep and gravelly, like stones rolling in a creek bed. "May I come in? I've got a matter of business to discuss." Eleanor stepped back, suddenly aware of her patched dress and the broken teacup in her hand. What could the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties want with her? "I'm afraid I have no tea to offer," she said, hurriedly sweeping the remaining shards into her apron pocket. "I didn't come for tea." His eyes moved briefly to the red notice on her table, then away, as if he'd seen something too private. Eleanor gestured toward the faded settee, its once blue fabric now worn to a pale memory of color. He sat, the fine furniture of his ranch house surely making this poor seating feel uncomfortable by comparison. "I'll be direct, Miss Pierce. I find myself in need of a wife." The remaining piece of teacup slipped from Eleanor's fingers, landing with a soft thud on the rag rug. "A wife?" she echoed, wondering if the cold had affected her hearing. Augustus Montgomery's face remained impassive, his beard neatly trimmed but showing the first strands of silver at 42. 5 years a widower, he was still handsome in a rugged way that made the unmarried women of Willow Creek flutter their eyelashes when he came to town. "Not in the traditional sense," he clarified, pulling off leather gloves to reveal strong, calloused hands. "I need a housekeeper and a mother for my daughter, Lily. She turned 8 last month and is growing wild without proper female guidance." Eleanor remained standing, too stunned to join him on the settee. "Mr. Montgomery, surely there are women in town more suited." "I'm not looking for a society wife," he interrupted. "I had a love match once. Margaret was—" For a moment, his mask slipped, showing a flash of something raw beneath. "That part of my life is over. What I need now is practicality." From his coat pocket, he withdrew folded papers, placing them on the table beside the eviction notice. The contrast was stark. The bank's cheap paper against the thick, cream-colored document with contract of marriage, written in bold letters at the top. "My proposal is simple. You would have your own room at the ranch, financial security, respectable standing in the community. In exchange, you would manage my household and provide a maternal influence for Lily." Eleanor's mind raced like a spring creek in flood. Why me? The question came out barely above a whisper. For the first time, Augustus looked directly at her, his eyes the color of a storm-washed sky. You have a reputation for kindness. Your father's mistakes weren't yours, yet you faced them with dignity. And his gaze flicked again to the eviction notice. You need the security I can provide. It would be a mutually beneficial arrangement. A business transaction. That's all this was. Yet something in Eleanor's chest tightened at the thought of living under the same roof as this stern, closed-off man whose grief was almost visible, like a shadow trailing behind him. And if I refuse? A muscle twitched in his jaw. Then I'll wish you good day and look elsewhere. I'm not a man who forces bargains, Miss Pierce. The wind rattled the windows, as if reminding Eleanor of the harshness waiting outside. 2 weeks until she had nowhere to go. Pride was a poor blanket against February snow. When would this arrangement begin? Immediately. The wedding would be small. Just the minister and witnesses. Wedding. The word hung in the air between them. Not a dream of white lace and flower garlands, but a contract signing with a gold band as the seal. I have one condition, Eleanor said, surprising herself with her boldness. If I agree to this, I want to be a true mother to Lily, not just a caretaker. Children know the difference. Something shifted in Augustus's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant respect. Very well. Though I should warn you, she still mourns her mother deeply. As do you, Eleanor observed quietly. His face shuddered closed again. My feelings aren't part of this contract, Miss Pierce. As he stood to leave, he towered over her, but without menace. He was simply a large man, solid as the mountains west of town. I'll return tomorrow for your answer. His hand briefly touched the doorframe. For what it's worth, I believe you would be good for Lily. The door closed behind him, leaving Eleanor alone with 2 pieces of paper that represented 2 very different futures. The eviction notice promised certain hardship. The marriage contract offered security wrapped in loneliness. She picked up Augustus's contract, his neat, precise handwriting filling the page with terms and conditions, as if human connection could be captured in clauses and paragraphs. The last line waited for her signature, a blank space that felt both like a trap and an escape. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, soft and silent as secrets. By morning, the world would be transformed, covered in white that hid all the scars and imperfections beneath. Eleanor watched the snow gather on her windowsill and wondered if people could be remade as easily as landscapes. You may sign your name here, Mrs. Montgomery. The words jolted Eleanor like cold water. Mrs. Montgomery, a name not hers just 15 minutes earlier. The church stood empty except for 5 people. Herself, Augustus, the minister, his wife as witness, and little Lily, a solemn-faced child with corn silk hair hastily braided and a blue dress that needed pressing. Outside, February snow fell in fat, lazy flakes, muffling the world. No wedding bells had rung. No friends had gathered with well wishes. Just the scratch of a pen on paper and mumbled vows neither meant beyond their practical purpose. Is she really my new mama now? Lily's voice piped up, her eyes, so like her father's, studying Eleanor with suspicion. The minister's wife, Mrs. Collins, patted Lily's shoulder. Yes, dear, that's how it works when people marry. She won't replace my real mama, Lily declared, loud enough for Eleanor to hear as she handed the marriage certificate back to the minister. My real mama is in heaven watching over me. Augustus knelt before his daughter, his large hand gentle on her small shoulder. No one could replace your mother, Lilyflower, Miss Eleanor. He caught himself. Mrs. Montgomery is here to help us, that's all. Help us. Not join us, not become family. Just help like a servant with a ring. Eleanor crushed the disappointment beneath her practical boots. What had she expected? Romance? Love? She'd signed up for security and shelter, nothing more. The ride to the Montgomery ranch stretched in uncomfortable silence. 5 miles of snow-covered prairie passed beneath the wagon wheels, the only sounds the creak of wood and the steady breathing of the horses. Eleanor clutched her small case of belongings on her lap, everything she owned now contained in a space no bigger than a bread box. "Will I have to call her Mama?" Lily whispered to Augustus, not bothering to lower her voice. "You may call me Eleanor," she answered directly, tired of being talked about as if she weren't there. "We can decide on anything else when we know each other better." Lily's eyes widened at being addressed so forthrightly, but she gave a small nod before turning to watch the snow-covered landscape. The ranch appeared suddenly over a rise, larger than Eleanor had imagined from town gossip. The main house was 2 stories of solid craftsmanship, with a wide porch and many windows. Yet as they drew closer, she noticed the missing fence pickets, peeling paint, and sagging steps, the signs of a home maintaining appearances while slowly surrendering to neglect. For ranch hands appeared to take the wagon and horses. They nodded respectfully to Eleanor, but she caught their curious glances. The new Mrs. Montgomery, purchased like a workhorse for practical purposes. The inside of the house confirmed her suspicions from its exterior. Once fine furnishings filled the rooms, but dust caked the mantelpiece. Yesterday's breakfast dishes still sat on the kitchen table, and curtains hung crooked on their rods. The air smelled stale, with undertones of burned coffee and unwashed laundry. "Lily, show Mrs. Montgomery to her room while I speak with Hank about tomorrow's cattle move," Augustus said, already removing his hat and coat. "But Papa, now please." His voice brooked no argument. Lily's small shoulders slumped, but she trudged toward the staircase. "This way," she said without looking back. The upstairs hallway held 6 doors. Lily pointed to each as they passed. "That's Papa's office. No one goes in there without permission. That's the linen closet. That's the bathroom. We have indoor plumbing," she added proudly. "That's Papa's bedroom. That's my room. And that's yours." The last door opened to reveal a pleasant room with afternoon light streaming through lace curtains. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, covered with a faded quilt. A washstand with porcelain basin, a wardrobe, and a small writing desk completed the furnishings. "Was this your mother's room?" Eleanor asked gently. Lily's chin came up defensively. "No. My Mama and Papa shared a room like real married people. This was the guest room, but we never have guests." Until now, the implication hung unspoken. Eleanor set her case on the bed. "Thank you for showing me, Lily. Perhaps you could also show me the kitchen later? I should start dinner soon. Mrs. Abernathy comes on Mondays and Thursdays to cook and clean, but she left already. There's probably stew." With that, Lily vanished down the hallway, the patter of her footsteps receding like retreating hail. Left alone, Eleanor unpacked her meager belongings: 3 dresses, undergarments, a hairbrush that had been her mother's, and a small wooden bird her father had carved before the drinking and gambling took over his life. She placed the bird on the windowsill where light caught its simple wings. The house creaked and settled around her. Unfamiliar sounds in an unfamiliar life. Through the window, she could see the vast expanse of the Montgomery Ranch stretching toward distant hills. Her home now, yet she'd never felt more homeless. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Augustus stood in the doorway, still wearing his coat, snow melting on his shoulders. "The room is satisfactory?" More statement than question. "Yes, thank you. It's lovely." Awkward silence stretched between them. What did one say to a husband who wasn't really a husband? "Supper will be at 6, he finally said. "Lily usually helps set the table." Eleanor nodded. "I'll get settled and come down to prepare the meal." Mrs. Abernathy left stew. So Lily mentioned. Another silence, heavier than the last. "Mr. Montgomery?" Eleanor began, then stopped, suddenly uncertain what she wanted to ask. What were the rules here? The boundaries? The expectations beyond the clear terms of their contract? "Augustus," he corrected. "You should call me Augustus, at least when others are present." "Augustus." She tried the name, foreign on her tongue. "What are your expectations for me, beyond what was written in our agreement?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the directness of her question. His gaze moved around the room, landing everywhere but on her face. My daughter needs structure and feminine guidance. My household needs proper management. The ranch hands need regular meals and clean quarters. He spoke as if reciting a memorized list. I need. He trailed off, seemingly at a loss. And what do I need? Eleanor asked softly. That caught his attention. His eyes, gray as the winter sky, finally met hers, genuine surprise in them. You needed security. You have that now. His tone suggested the matter was settled. Eleanor moved to the window, needing distance from his imposing presence. Security isn't the same as happiness or fulfillment, Mr. Montgomery. Augustus. Happiness wasn't part of our arrangement. The bluntness of his words stung more than she expected. No, it wasn't, she agreed, keeping her voice steady. But respect was implied, I think. And perhaps, eventually, a kind of partnership. Something flickered across his face. Confusion, guilt, or perhaps simple discomfort at discussing feelings so directly. I respect you, Mrs. Montgomery. Eleanor, she corrected. If I'm to call you Augustus, then surely. Eleanor. He said her name as if testing a foreign word. I'll see you at supper. He closed the door firmly behind him, his footsteps heavy on the hallway floor. Eleanor pressed her forehead against the cold window glass, watching as ranch hands moved between outbuildings in the falling snow. In town, she'd been the scandalous gambler's daughter, pitted and whispered about. Here she was the purchased wife, an arrangement of convenience. The vastness of the land spread before her, white and empty, a contract fulfilled, yet a hollowness expanding within her chest. A wedding day with no celebration, a marriage with no marriage bed, a home that didn't feel like home. She was Mrs. Montgomery now. But who was Eleanor? The teacup slipped from Lily's small fingers, shattering against the kitchen floor with a crash that made the child flinch and shrink back. Eleanor froze, waiting for the shout that would surely come. But Augustus merely sighed from his newspaper at the table. The tension hung thick as honey in winter. I'm sorry, Lily blurted, eyes wide with fear. Eleanor knelt beside the broken pieces, gently guiding Lily back. Accidents happen in every home, she said, her voice soft but steady. Would you like to help me clean up? From the corner of her eye, Eleanor caught Augustus watching them, something unreadable flickering across his face. March had arrived with warmer breezes that carried the promise of spring to the Montgomery ranch. 6 weeks into their marriage of convenience, Eleanor had scrubbed every corner of the neglected house, organized the chaotic kitchen, and planted seedlings for a kitchen garden. Yet the emotional walls remained firmly intact. Lily approached her with the caution of a wild deer, and Augustus spoke mainly of household matters, retreating to his office most evenings. But as Eleanor and Lily worked together to sweep up the broken teacup, something shifted in the air between them. Mama had a special way of sweeping, Lily volunteered suddenly. She would hum while she did it. Eleanor's hands stilled on the broom. This was the first time Lily had mentioned her mother without pain clouding her features. What song did she hum? Eleanor asked gently. I don't remember, Lily admitted, shoulders dropping. I was only 3 when she died. Later that afternoon, Eleanor hummed softly while hanging laundry in the fresh spring air. The tune was one her own mother had sung, a simple melody about wildflowers and sunshine. She didn't notice Lily watching from the porch steps until the child began folding the dry cloths, her small face serious with concentration. You don't have to help, Eleanor said. I want to, Lily replied simply. You hum nice. That evening, finding Augustus's office door ajar, Eleanor glimpsed him hunched over account books, exhaustion evident in the slope of his shoulders, hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. The cattle need moving to the north pasture tomorrow, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Johnson's down with fever. Williams quit last week after that fight with Peterson. I could help, Eleanor offered from the doorway. Augustus looked up sharply, surprise replacing the worry lines on his face. With the cattle, I grew up around horses before father's gambling debts took everything. I can ride better than most men in this county. His eyebrows rose. That's quite a claim for a seamstress. I wasn't always just a seamstress, Eleanor countered, lifting her chin. My mother died when I was 12. Father and I ran our small farm together for years before his drinking started. A silence stretched between them, filled with the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall and unspoken questions. We leave at dawn, Augustus finally said. Wear something sturdy. Morning arrived with a pink-streaked sky and ground mist curling around the fence posts. Eleanor stood by the barn in her oldest dress and a pair of men's riding boots she'd found in a storage chest, hair braided tightly beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The ranch hands eyed her with skeptical glances that melted into surprised respect when she swung onto her horse without assistance. Mrs. Montgomery knows horses, Augustus announced, silencing the murmurs with a single stern look. She rides with us today. The north pasture lay 3 miles away across rolling hills dotted with early wildflowers and patches of melting snow. Eleanor breathed deeply of the fresh air, feeling freer than she had in months. The cattle moved reluctantly, lowing their protests at being disturbed from their winter pasture. They're like grumpy old men who don't want to move from their favorite chairs, she joked to a young ranch hand who rode beside her. The boy, no more than 16, laughed, then quickly glanced at Augustus to see if his employer disapproved. To Eleanor's surprise, the corner of Augustus's mouth twitched upward. You ride well, he commented later, as they paused to let the cattle rest in a sheltered valley. Margaret was afraid of horses after a fall as a child. It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned his late wife, and Eleanor stored the information carefully away like a precious keepsake. Some fears can be overcome with patience, she ventured, and some remain no matter how much we wish otherwise, Augustus replied, his gaze distant. After noon, Lily joined them, riding double with her father to check on the new calves. The girl's face glowed with excitement as they approached a creek where the herd had gathered to drink. Suddenly, a rattlesnake slithered from beneath a sun-warmed rock, startling Lily's pony. The horse reared with a terrified whinny, sending the child tumbling into the muddy creek bank. Eleanor was off her mount in an instant, splashing through the water before Augustus could even dismount. Her heart pounded as she reached Lily, who lay stunned in the mud. Are you hurt? She asked, hands quickly checking for injuries. Lily blinked up at her, then burst into tears, not of pain but of embarrassment. My new dress is ruined. Relief flooded Eleanor's chest as she helped the girl sit up. You're all right? She soothed, wiping mud from Lily's tearful face with her handkerchief. Brave girls get muddy sometimes. It's a badge of honor. What's a badge of honor? Lily sniffled. A sign that you've done something courageous, Eleanor explained, helping her stand. Like riding to see the calves and not crying even though you took a scary fall. Later, as they approached the ranch house, tired but satisfied with the day's work, Augustus's voice came low beside her. Thank you for today. He gestured vaguely toward Lily riding ahead with one of the ranch hands, chattering about the baby calves. She's part of our arrangement, isn't she? Eleanor replied, but her smile softened the words into something warmer. The arrangement, Augustus began, then fell silent for several paces. It's working better than I expected. That evening, Eleanor taught Lily how to salvage her mud-stained dress with careful scrubbing and a faint bleach solution. The girl listened with complete attention, asking questions about different fabrics and stains that revealed a quick mind. Would you like me to teach you to sew? Eleanor offered, struck by sudden inspiration. Every woman should know how to mend and create. Could I make a dress for my doll? Lily asked, excitement replacing her usual caution. We'll start with that tomorrow, Eleanor promised. Perhaps your father will take us to town for fabric on Saturday. At bedtime, Augustus appeared in the doorway as Eleanor finished reading to Lily, a nightly ritual she'd started the previous week. He stood awkwardly, watching them with an expression caught between longing and uncertainty. Papa, Lily exclaimed. Eleanor's going to teach me to sew a doll dress. Is she now? Augustus asked, his eyes meeting Eleanor's over the child's head. "Only if you approve," Eleanor said carefully. "I think." Augustus paused, stepping further into the room. "I think it's time Lily called you something besides your first name. Perhaps Mother would be appropriate, given our arrangement." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning beyond a simple title. Lily looked between them, sensing the importance of the moment. "Would that be all right?" the girl asked Eleanor, vulnerability naked in her question. Eleanor's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. "I would be honored," she managed to say. That night, as Augustus bid her good night in the hallway between their rooms, his hand brushed hers, the barest whisper of contact, yet it sent warmth spreading up her arm. "Sleep well, Eleanor," he said, his voice deeper than usual. Eleanor noticed her bedroom door wasn't fully closed when Augustus turned away. Neither was his. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the dinner table where Eleanor froze mid-sentence, a fork of potatoes halfway to her mouth. The thunder that followed shook the windows in their frames, making Lily squeal with delighted fear. Outside, rain fell in angry sheets, turning the ranch yard into a lake of mud and sending rivers of water down the hillsides. "Will the creek flood, Papa?" Lily asked, pressing her nose against the window despite Eleanor's gentle reminders about proper table manners. Augustus frowned, calculations visible behind his eyes. "If this keeps up through the night, we'll likely lose the bridge to town by morning." Eleanor had never seen such storms as those that arrived with April in cattle country. 3 days of relentless downpour had transformed the landscape, trapping them on their side of the rapidly rising creek. The cozy domesticity they'd begun to build in March now felt both intensified by their isolation and threatened by forces beyond their control. A pounding at the door startled them all. Augustus rose, hand automatically reaching for the rifle kept by the entryway. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice tight with an emotion Eleanor couldn't quite name. Muffled voices carried from the front hall, Augustus's low rumble met by another man's smoother tones. When they entered the dining room, Eleanor was struck first by the family resemblance. The stranger had Augustus's height and jaw, though his eyes lacked the depth she'd grown accustomed to seeing across the breakfast table. "Robert," Augustus said stiffly. "This is my wife, Eleanor, and you remember Lily." "Uncle Robert," Lily cried, launching herself from her chair into the newcomer's arms. He caught her with practiced ease, spinning her once before setting her down. "My favorite niece," he declared with a wink. "Pretty as ever." "I'm your only niece," Lily giggled. Eleanor rose, extending her hand with the polite smile she reserved for difficult customers in her seamstress days. "Welcome, Mr. Montgomery. Please, call me Robert," he insisted, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary. "I'm stranded until the bridge is repaired. My wagon nearly went into the creek trying to cross. I hope you don't mind housing a poor, waterlogged brother-in-law." Where Augustus was reserved, Robert was all charm and easy smiles. Over the hastily expanded dinner, he entertained them with stories of his travels as a horse trader, each tale more elaborate than the last. Lily laughed delightedly at his exaggerated gestures, while Augustus grew increasingly quiet, his fork scraping against his plate with unnecessary force. "And how did you two meet?" Robert asked, helping himself to a second serving of Eleanor's apple pie. Augustus's letter announcing his marriage was sadly lacking in romantic details. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was a practical arrangement. "A contract marriage," Augustus stated flatly. Eleanor needed security, and Lily needed a mother's guidance. Robert's eyebrows rose. "Always the romantic, my brother. Though perhaps," he added, his gaze lingering on Eleanor's face, "he's finally found something worth breaking his ridiculous vow." "What vow?" Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. A strange silence fell over the table. Lily looked between the adults with the keen awareness children develop when they sense underlying currents they don't understand. Robert smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. To never love again after Margaret. To keep her memory pristine. His emphasis on the last word carried a weight Eleanor couldn't decipher. The next morning, Eleanor woke to shouting from the barn. Wrapping a shawl around her nightdress, she hurried to the window, squinting through the gray dawn light. Augustus and Robert stood toe-to-toe among the hay bales, Augustus's finger jabbing at his brother's chest. "Keep your distance," she made out through the rain-streaked glass. "I mean it, Robert." Later, as she kneaded bread dough with more force than necessary, Robert appeared in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame with casual grace. "My brother was always the lucky one," he remarked, watching her work. "First father left him the ranch. Then he found Margaret, and now you." Eleanor kept her eyes on the dough. "You seem to have done well for yourself in the horse trade." Robert chuckled. "Money isn't everything, though it certainly helps. Tell me, does Augustus still keep her portrait by his bed?" "I wouldn't know," Eleanor replied carefully. "We have separate rooms." Something like triumph flashed across Robert's face. "Of course you do. My brother and his principles." He took a step closer. "Has he told you about Margaret? About how she died?" Eleanor's hands stilled. In 3 months of marriage, Augustus had mentioned his first wife only a handful of times, each reference brief and carefully contained. "A riding accident," she said. 5 years ago. Is that all he told you?" Robert asked, his voice softening to something almost like pity. Typical Augustus, hiding the truth even when. The back door banged open, admitting Augustus and a gust of rain-scented air. His eyes narrowed at finding his brother so close to Eleanor. "The south fence line needs repair," he stated tersely. "Make yourself useful, Robert." That afternoon, confined to the house by renewed downpours, Eleanor decided to tackle the attic, the last untouched territory in her campaign to bring order to the Montgomery home. Dust motes danced in the beams of light from the single window as she sorted through trunks of outgrown clothes and forgotten holiday decorations. Behind a stack of leather-bound ledgers, she found a small wooden box, not locked, but carefully placed out of casual sight. Inside lay letters tied with faded blue ribbon, and a daguerreotype of a beautiful woman with lily's eyes and a proud tilt to her chin. Margaret's smile seemed secretive, knowing, and directed at someone other than the photographer. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she carefully untied the ribbon. The letters were addressed to "My dearest M," and filled with passionate declarations Eleanor felt she had no right to read. Yet one phrase caught her eye. "When you leave him, we'll go west to California." The sound of Augustus's heavy tread on the stairs sent Eleanor scrambling to replace the box, but not before she glimpsed a signature at the bottom of the top letter. "Forever yours R. Robert." "Eleanor," Augustus called from below. "Are you up there?" She appeared at the top of the attic stairs, dust in her hair and guilt on her face. "Just organizing," she managed. That evening, Robert insisted on telling Lily bedtime stories. Tales of princesses who ran away with charming knights instead of staying in their castles. Eleanor sat with her mending, watching Augustus's jaw clench tighter with each word. When Lily finally slept and Eleanor had gone to her room, raised voices drifted up from below. "You've always wanted what was mine," Augustus growled, the words floating up the stairwell as Eleanor paused by the banister. "And you've always been blind to what you have," Robert's voice replied, edged with bitterness. "That woman isn't Margaret. Thank God for that." Glass shattered. A door slammed. Eleanor retreated to her room, heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Near midnight, the storm reached its peak. Wind howled through every crack in the sturdy house, and thunder crashed overhead in waves that seemed to shake the very foundation. Eleanor lit a candle, unable to sleep amid nature's fury, and found herself drawn to the window that overlooked the creek. In the next flash of lightning, she saw it, the bridge, or what remained of it, washing away in churning, muddy torrents. They were truly isolated now. A soft knock at her door startled her. Augustus stood in the hallway, soaked to the skin, rainwater pooling at his feet. "The barn roof is leaking," he said without preamble. "I've moved the horses to the south stalls, but we may lose hay if this keeps up." "You're drenched," Eleanor replied. concern overriding her earlier unease. "You'll catch your death. Come in and get dry while I make you tea." Hesitation flickered across his face before he stepped inside. The first time he'd entered her bedroom since showing it to her on their wedding day. He stood awkwardly in the center of the room, dripping on the braided rug, looking lost in a way that made Eleanor's heart twist unexpectedly. She handed him a towel from her washstand. "What happened downstairs?" "With Robert." Augustus's face darkened. "My brother has always coveted what isn't his. Be careful around him, Eleanor." "He said something about Margaret," she ventured. "About how she died." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the drumming of rain against the windows and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Augustus's shoulders slumped, the proud posture he maintained even when alone finally giving way. "She was leaving me," he said so quietly Eleanor had to lean forward to hear. "For him. For Robert. Her horse spooked during a storm much like this one. They found her at the bottom of Miller's Ravine." The confession hung in the air between them, a truth finally spoken aloud after years of silence. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered, unsure if she was apologizing for Margaret's betrayal or her own discovery of it. Augustus looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing past the convenient arrangement to the woman beneath. "I didn't want Lily to know. I've let everyone believe it was just a tragic accident." "To protect her," Eleanor nodded. "That's what parents do." "Parents," Augustus repeated softly. "Yes, I suppose that's what we are now." Another crash of thunder shook the house, and somewhere down the hall, Lily cried out in fear. They both moved at once, their shared concern for the child bridging the gap between contract and something deeper. As dawn broke, the storm finally moved on, leaving behind a transformed landscape of fallen branches and swollen waterways. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the sun break through clouds in golden shafts of light. Behind her, Augustus and Lily sat at the breakfast table, their voices a comforting murmur of family normality. Robert appeared at her side, hat in hand. "The bridge is gone," he observed unnecessarily. "I suppose I'm your guest for a while longer." "Family is always welcome," Eleanor replied with a politeness that didn't reach her eyes. "As long as they remember whose home they're in." Robert studied her face, surprise giving way to grudging respect. "You're nothing like her, are you?" Margaret would have used this opportunity to drive a wedge between brothers. "I'm not interested in wedges," Eleanor said. "Only in building something sturdy enough to weather any storm." As if understanding her meaning perfectly, Robert nodded once. "I'll be moving on as soon as the water recedes." "Some fences can't be mended, Mrs. Montgomery." "Perhaps not," Eleanor agreed. "But new ones can always be built." The pistol shot cracked through the air as the May Day celebration began, making Eleanor jump. It was only the starter for the children's sack race, but her nerves had been on edge since finding Margaret's hidden letters in the attic. "Look at my dress twirl, Mrs. Eleanor." Lily spun in the new blue dress Eleanor had stayed up 3 nights to finish, the fabric catching sunlight like water. Eleanor had pinned tiny white flowers into Lily's golden braids, transforming the once unkempt child into the picture of springtime joy. "You shine brighter than the sun itself," Eleanor whispered, her throat tight with unexpected feeling. Somewhere during the endless winter, this child had claimed a piece of her heart. Lily tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. "Will Papa watch me race? I'm faster than Tommy Wilson now." "I'm sure he wouldn't miss it," Eleanor promised, though Augustus had barely spoken 10 words since breakfast. He stood across the town square, hat pulled low, nodding stiffly to neighbors who approached. Mrs. Winters sidled up beside Eleanor, her powder-caked face creased with false concern. "How charitable of you to take on another woman's child, and such a troubled man." Her voice dropped. "Everyone knows it's just a business arrangement between you two." Why, Mildred Jenkins saw the contract on his desk when she delivered mending. Eleanor's cheeks burned. "Excuse me, Mrs. Winters. My husband is waiting." She marched across the square, chin high despite the weight of stairs following her progress. The town had decided what her marriage was, a cold transaction, and no amount of truth would change their minds. "Sheriff's looking for you," Eleanor murmured, reaching Augustus's side. His face was drawn, shadows beneath his eyes from nights spent pacing his study after he thought she'd gone to sleep. Across the square, Sheriff Davis approached, dust coating his boots. He'd been gone 3 days tracking cattle rustlers. "Montgomery," he called, waving a yellow paper. "Telegram came while I was in Boulder. Marked urgent from your Denver bank." Augustus's hand trembled slightly as he took the telegram. Eleanor watched as the color drained from his face, his knuckles whitening around the paper's edge. "Is it bad news?" she asked, stepping closer so only he could hear. "Robert." The name fell like a stone between them. "He's taken everything from the Denver account. The cattle money, Lily's schooling fund. All of it." Eleanor's mind raced, calculating what they had, what they needed. "The north pasture can be sold. We still have the breeding stock." Augustus looked at her as if seeing something new. "We have nothing. This isn't your burden." Eleanor straightened her spine. "The day I signed that paper, I became a Montgomery. What happens to you and Lily happens to me." A commotion erupted by the refreshment tables. Lily had fallen during her race, her new dress mud-splattered, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Eleanor moved without thinking, kneeling in the dirt to gather the sobbing child. "I wanted to win for Papa," Lily hiccuped against Eleanor's shoulder. "So he'd be proud like the other fathers." Over Lily's head, Eleanor met Augustus's gaze. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the wall he'd built. Rain began to fall as they drove home, fat drops that matched Lily's dwindling tears as she drifted to sleep against Eleanor's side. By the time they reached the ranch, the downpour had become a deluge, forcing them to carry Lily through curtains of water to the house. "I'll make tea," Eleanor said. Once Lily was tucked into bed, she moved toward the kitchen, but Augustus caught her wrist, the first time he'd touched her deliberately. "Why are you still here?" he asked, voice rough with emotion. "You know what the town says. You could leave, find a real marriage." Eleanor didn't pull away. "Is that what you want?" "I want." He released her, turning toward the fire. "I need to tell you the truth about Margaret." The confession spilled out in broken sentences as the storm raged outside. Margaret and Robert's secret affair. Her plans to abandon Augustus and Lily. The morning ride where she'd been thrown from her horse and killed instantly. The town's insistence on remembering her as the perfect wife while Augustus alone carried the knowledge of her betrayal. "She was wearing Robert's locket when they found her," Augustus said, staring into the flames. "I buried her with it still around her neck, then let everyone believe I was the grieving husband too devoted to move on." Eleanor sank into the chair opposite him. "So the contract marriage protected me from ever being fooled again." He looked up, eyes reflecting firelight and something more vulnerable. "I never expected you." "Expected what about me?" she asked, heart hammering against her ribs. "That you would make me question if I was wrong about." He swallowed hard. "About trust being possible again. About being more than Margaret's bitter husband and Lily's half-present father." Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the room in stark white for a heartbeat. In that flash, Eleanor saw the future hovering before them, a real marriage growing from the ashes of their arrangement. Then darkness returned, and with it, uncertainty. "What happens now?" she whispered. Augustus reached across the space between them, his calloused fingers finding hers in the shadowed room. "I don't know," he admitted. "But for the first time in 5 years, I want to find out." The scissors sliced through the expensive blue silk with a sound that made Eleanor wince. $3 a yard, an extravagance she'd never have considered 6 months ago. But Mrs. Henderson's wedding gown for her daughter would pay more than enough to cover it, if Eleanor could finish the work before the cattle buyer arrived tomorrow. June heat pressed against the windows like a living thing, making the air inside the ranch house thick and still. Eleanor wiped sweat from her forehead with her sleeve, careful not to drip on the delicate fabric. Outside, Augustus's voice carried from the corral where he was breaking a new horse. His words indistinct but his tone gentle. So much had changed since the May Day social and his confession about Margaret. Small touches, his hand at her elbow when helping her into the wagon, fingers brushing when passing the sugar bowl at breakfast. Words unspoken but understood in glances across the dinner table. "Is that a princess dress?" Lily appeared in the doorway, her bare feet dusty from the yard, a smudge of dirt across one cheek. "It's for Miss Henderson's wedding," Eleanor explained, setting aside her scissors. "Come wash your face before lunch." Lily skipped to the wash basin. "Tommy Wilson says his ma says you're not my real mama." The child's voice was matter-of-fact. Without the hurt Eleanor felt stab through her own chest. Eleanor knelt before the girl, taking her small hands. Families aren't just about who gave birth to whom. They're about who chooses to love each other every day. "Like you chose Papa? With your contract?" The questions kept coming as only a child's could, direct and unanswerable. "That was the beginning," Eleanor said carefully. "But choices don't stop after signing a paper." The sound of approaching hoofbeats saved Eleanor from further explanation. Augustus appeared in the doorway, his shirt damp with sweat, eyes serious. "Cattle buyer's here early," he said. "And he's not alone." Eleanor followed him onto the porch, Lily trailing behind. A cloud of dust announced the approaching riders, 3 men, not one. The central figure became clear as they neared. Robert Montgomery, flanked by strangers whose hands hovered too near their gun belts. "Take Lily inside," Augustus murmured, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. "No." Eleanor stood firm beside him. "We face this together." Robert dismounted with exaggerated care, his easy smile not reaching his eyes. "Brother, I've brought Mr. Dawson all the way from Kansas City to see your fine cattle." The cattle buyer nodded from his horse, a thin man with calculating eyes. "Montgomery. And who might these other gentlemen be?" Augustus asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Business associates," Robert replied smoothly. "Now, about those cattle we discussed." "We've discussed nothing," Augustus cut in. "You stole my money and disappeared." Robert's smile faltered. "A misunderstanding. I've come to make it right. Mr. Dawson here is prepared to pay top dollar. With certain conditions," the buyer added, eyes flicking between the brothers. Something in his tone made Eleanor step forward. "What conditions?" The third man spat tobacco juice into the dust. "The Montgomery brand gets folded into the Western Cattle Company. Both properties, one operation." "Owned by whom?" Augustus demanded. Robert spread his hands. "Jointly managed. A family business, brother." Augustus's laugh held no humor. "The last family business ended with you emptying my accounts." "That money went to secure this deal," Robert insisted. "Listen to reason, Gus. You can't make it alone. The drought's coming, everyone knows it. Small ranchers will be wiped out." Eleanor watched Augustus's face carefully. The muscles in his jaw worked as he calculated, weighed options. They had discussed selling part of the herd to cover expenses after Robert's theft. But this was different. This was surrender. "We need time to consider," Eleanor stated firmly. Robert's expression hardened. "The offer expires today. Mr. Dawson has other appointments." "Then it expires," Augustus replied. "I'll not be rushed into handing over what's mine." The stillness that followed felt dangerous, like the moment before lightning strikes. The third man shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his gun. "Papa!" Lily's voice broke the tension as she darted forward, wrapping her arms around Augustus's leg. "Don't let the bad men take our cows." Something shifted in Augustus's posture. He placed a protective hand on Lily's head, then reached for Eleanor with the other, drawing her to his side. "You took Margaret's love," he said, voice low and steady. "You took Lily's inheritance. You'll take nothing more from my family." Family. The word hung in the air between them all. Robert's face twisted. "Margaret was mine first. She never loved you, never wanted this life." He gestured contemptuously at the ranch. She was leaving you that day. And she died for it? Augustus replied, sorrow rather than anger in his voice. I've made my peace with that. I suggest you do the same. The cattle buyer cleared his throat. This family drama isn't my concern. Do we have a deal or not? Not, Augustus and Eleanor said in unison. After the dust from the departing riders had settled, Eleanor found Augustus in Margaret's old garden, now transformed by Eleanor's plantings. The roses were gone, replaced by herbs and vegetables, lavender and sunflowers. I know selling part of the herd will be hard, Eleanor said, kneeling beside him where he pulled weeds with focused intensity. But my sewing will help. The Henderson wedding gown alone will bring $30. Augustus sat back on his heels, studying her face. You're really staying? After everything? After Robert? Eleanor reached out, brushing a streak of dirt from his cheek, a mirror of her earlier gesture with Lily. I signed a contract for security. I'm staying for something else entirely. What? The question was barely a whisper. Hope, she answered simply. The hope that broken pieces can form something new, something stronger. Augustus looked around at the garden, once Margaret's pride, now Eleanor's creation, different yet beautiful in its own way. His fingers gently touched a blooming lavender plant Eleanor had nursed through the spring. I always thought I couldn't love again because the wound was too deep, he admitted, voice rough with emotion. I never considered that perhaps the wound could heal into something different. A meadowlark called from the fence post, its sweet song filling the moment between them. Eleanor's heart beat a rhythm of possibility as Augustus's hand found hers among the green shoots of new growth. Blood streaked the dawn sky as Eleanor awoke to the sound of frantic knocking. Her heart lurched in her chest, memories of similar pre-dawn disturbances bringing nothing but trouble. Mrs. Montgomery. The voice belonged to young Billy Jenkins, one of the ranch hands. Fire at the south pasture. Augustus was already pulling on his boots, face grim in the dim light. Wake Lily, he told Eleanor. The winds blowing north might reach the house. By the time Eleanor had Lily dressed and valuables packed, orange flames were visible on the horizon, consuming dry grass with terrifying speed. Ranch hands formed a bucket line from the well to the garden, where they soaked blankets and sacks. Did lightning start it? Eleanor asked, joining the women who had arrived from neighboring ranches. Mrs. Hargrove shook her head grimly. In this dry spell? With no storm? Not likely. For grueling hours later, the fire was contained, but not before destroying the entire south pasture and nearly 50 head of cattle. Augustus returned to the house, face blackened with soot, eyes red from smoke. Robert? Eleanor asked quietly, passing him a cup of water. Augustus nodded once, his jaw clenched. Found his cigarette case near where it started. The weeks following the fire tested them all. Lily developed a hacking cough from the smoke that lingered in the air. The surviving cattle needed new grazing land. And whispers in town suggested the Montgomery Ranch was cursed. First Robert's theft, now fire. September brought the county fair and livestock auction. Their chance to sell the remaining herd at decent prices before winter. Eleanor had finished 3 wedding gowns, 2 baptismal dresses, and countless mending jobs to help keep food on the table. You look beautiful, Augustus said, watching Eleanor pin her hair before the mirror. His unexpected compliment made her hands falter. It's just my old blue dress, she replied, flushing. He stepped closer, his reflection appearing behind hers in the glass. Not the dress. The fairgrounds bustled with activity. Farmers displaying prize vegetables, women competing with preserves and needlework, children leading groomed animals for judging. Eleanor had entered her quilting in the women's exhibits, while Augustus prepared to auction 20 head of cattle. Mrs. Montgomery, Judge Wilson's wife approached, her voice honey-sweet but eyes calculating. Such lovely work. She gestured to Eleanor's quilt, a star pattern in blues and creams. Though perhaps not quite as fine as Mrs. Daniels' work. Still quite good for someone without proper training. Eleanor smiled tightly. Thank you for your assessment. As Mrs. Wilson moved away, Lily appeared, clutching a ribbon. "Look! Second place for my jam." Eleanor knelt, embracing the child. "I'm so proud of you. Did you tell your father?" "He said we'd celebrate tonight," Lily confided. "With a surprise." The cattle auction began at noon, drawing ranchers from 3 counties. Eleanor stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Augustus lead their healthiest steers into the ring. The auctioneer's rapid-fire chant filled the air as prices climbed. Eleanor felt a presence beside her and turned to find Sheriff Davis. "Mrs. Montgomery, might I have a word?" Her stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" "Just received a telegram from Denver," the sheriff said quietly. "Your brother-in-law was arrested trying to board a train east. Had papers on him. Deeds to land that aren't his." "Our land?" Eleanor realized, cold dread spreading through her. "Forged papers," the sheriff confirmed. "He was planning to sell your place right out from under you." When Eleanor shared the news with Augustus after the auction, his face showed no surprise. "He sent me this yesterday." He pulled a crumpled note from his pocket. "Said he'd stop trying to ruin us if I signed over half the ranch." "What will you do?" "What will we do?" Augustus corrected gently. "And we'll let him face the consequences of his actions." That evening, as promised, they celebrated Lily's ribbon and the successful cattle sale that would see them through winter. Augustus brought out a small cake purchased from the baker's stand, and something else, a velvet pouch. "For both of you," he said, uncharacteristically nervous. Inside lay 2 gold lockets, simple but elegant. "Open them," he urged. Eleanor's contained a tiny photograph of Lily on one side and Augustus on the other. Lily's held pictures of Eleanor and her father. "The contract brought us together," Augustus said, his voice unsteady. "But this past year, the fire, Robert, everything, showed me what truly matters." He took Eleanor's hands in his. "When I promised it was just a contract marriage, I believed it. I thought my heart was sealed away forever. And now," Eleanor whispered, hardly daring to hope, "now I'd like to make a different promise." He pulled a sheet of paper from his pocket, their original contract, and placed it in her hands. One based not on convenience, but on choice. "You kept this." Eleanor ran her fingers over the faded ink of their signatures. "As a reminder of where we began," Augustus said, "but not where we need to stay." Lily watched them with wide eyes. "Are you getting married again?" Eleanor laughed softly. "No, sweet girl. We're just changing the terms." Together they wrote a new promise on the blank side of the paper. Not a contract of convenience, but a covenant of choice. They signed their names, then let Lily add hers in careful, childish script. "What's different about this paper?" Lily asked. "The first one brought us together because we both needed help," Eleanor explained, using words a child could understand. "This one is because we've chosen to be a family." That night, after Lily was asleep, Augustus stood hesitantly at Eleanor's bedroom door, the door that had remained closed between them for so many months. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Eleanor held out her hand. "You've been welcome for longer than you know." As moonlight spilled across the bedroom floor, Augustus whispered against her hair. "I promised it was just a contract marriage. I never expected you would heal wounds I thought would never close." Eleanor smiled in the darkness, her heart full. "Some promises are meant to be broken." "Another letter from Robert?" Eleanor asked, watching Augustus's expression darken as he read the mail that December morning. Snow pressed against the windows, transforming the world outside into a blank canvas. "Not this time." Augustus passed her the envelope. "From the lawyer handling his case." Eleanor scanned the official letterhead. 6 months in prison for forgery and attempted fraud. The punishment seemed light for all the pain Robert had caused. Yet there was no satisfaction in seeing her brother-in-law behind bars. "He's asked to see Lily at Christmas," Augustus added, watching her carefully. "What do you think?" Eleanor stirred the morning porridge, buying time to consider. Robert was still Lily's uncle, despite everything. "I think family is complicated," Augustus replied. And that choices have consequences. Lily burst into the kitchen, wrapped in a knitted scarf Eleanor had made her. Can we get the tree today? Tommy Wilson says their tree touches the ceiling. Augustus ruffled her hair. After breakfast, though ours might not reach the ceiling. That's okay, Lily declared. Mrs. Hargrove says it's not the size that matters, it's who helps decorate it. Their laughter filled the kitchen, pushing away the shadow Robert's letter had cast. So much had changed in a year. The contract that once defined their relationship now sat in Augustus's desk drawer, replaced by something deeper that needed no signature. The trip to cut the Christmas tree became an adventure when their wagon wheel cracked halfway home. Augustus lifted Lily onto his shoulders while Eleanor carried the small pine they'd selected. Remember when you couldn't look me in the eye? Eleanor teased as they trudged through deepening snow. Now look at us, hauling a tree home like true pioneers. I was afraid, Augustus admitted, adjusting Lily's weight on his shoulders. Not of you, but of what you represented. And what was that? Eleanor asked, curious about this new openness. Hope, he said simply. The possibility that life could be more than endurance. That evening, as they decorated the tree with paper ornaments and strings of cranberries, a knock rattled the front door. Augustus opened it to find Sheriff Davis, hat in hand, snow dusting his shoulders. Sorry to intrude on your holiday preparations, the sheriff said, stomping snow from his boots. But there's been a situation at the county jail. Eleanor's heart sank. Robert escaped 2 days ago during a transfer, Davis confirmed. Stole a horse and headed west. Augustus's jaw tightened. You think he's coming here? It's possible, the sheriff acknowledged. I've got men patrolling, but with this storm, he gestured at the thickening snowfall. Just wanted to warn you. After the sheriff left, Augustus checked every window and door, his movements tense. Eleanor put Lily to bed with reassurances that everything was fine, though her own nerves jangled with each creak of the settling house. Do you think he'd really come here? She asked Augustus as they sat by the fire, the decorated tree glowing warmly in the corner. I don't know, Augustus admitted. Robert never could accept losing. The blizzard howled outside, rattling window panes and sending drafts down the chimney. Eleanor worked on her sewing, a new dress for Lily's Christmas gift, while Augustus cleaned his rifle, the familiar routine soothing them both. A crash from the kitchen shattered the quiet. Augustus was on his feet instantly, rifle ready. Stay here, he ordered. No. Eleanor grabbed the fireplace poker. Together, remember? The kitchen window lay broken, snow and wind swirling inside. A figure huddled against the back door, not breaking in, but seeking shelter. Robert, Augustus called, rifle raised. Please, came the feeble reply. I'm half frozen. Eleanor lit the lantern. In its glow, Robert appeared skeletal, his once handsome face gaunt and weathered, frostbite blackening his fingertips. Why come here? Augustus demanded, keeping the rifle trained on his brother. Nowhere else to go, Robert rasped. The law's behind me, creditors ahead. And you thought we'd help? After everything? Eleanor couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. Robert's laugh turned into a hacking cough. Not for my sake. For Margaret's. Augustus stiffened. Don't speak her name. She loved you, Robert said, words slurring slightly. Not the way you wanted, but she did. Said you were the better man. Too good for her. Eleanor watched the brothers, one standing, one fallen, and saw in that moment how easily their paths could have been reversed. How close Augustus had come to letting bitterness consume him, as it had Robert. We should send for the sheriff, Augustus said, looking to Eleanor. She nodded, then surprised herself by adding, but first, let's get him warm. Lily shouldn't see her uncle frozen to death on Christmas. They moved Robert to the sofa, wrapping him in blankets. His feverish ramblings revealed the extent of his troubles. Gambling debts, alcohol, schemes that always fell through. By morning, his fever broke, leaving him clear-eyed and surprisingly humble. Why help me? he asked Eleanor as she changed the bandages on his frostbitten hands. Because Augustus isn't the man you are, she replied honestly. And neither am I. When Sheriff Davis arrived to take Robert back to jail, Augustus made a decision that surprised them all. I'm dropping the charges for the forgery, he told the sheriff, on condition he serves his time for the escape and stays away from us after. Robert stared at his brother in disbelief. Why? Not for you, Augustus said firmly. For Lily. So she learns that hatred doesn't have to be the end of every story. That night, after the sheriff had taken Robert away, the family gathered around their Christmas tree. Lily placed a star cut from tin at the top, her face glowing with pride as Augustus lifted her high. Our first real Christmas, she declared. With a real family. Eleanor and Augustus exchanged a look over the child's head. A silent acknowledgement of how far they'd come from the cold January day when he'd knocked on her door with a business proposition. Later, Augustus presented Eleanor with a small wooden box. Not Margaret's, but one he'd crafted himself during the long autumn evenings. For memories we choose to make, he said as she opened it to find a journal, the first page already inscribed. The Montgomery family, St. 1885. Eleanor traced the words with her finger. When I signed that contract, I thought I was giving up dreams for security, and I thought I was gaining convenience while protecting myself from pain, Augustus added. We were both wrong in the best possible way. Outside, the winter wind that had once symbolized Eleanor's desperation now merely emphasized the warmth within their home. Through the window, the vast prairie stretched under moonlight, no longer a landscape of isolation but the foundation upon which they'd built something neither had believed possible. Our worth was never in what others thought of us or our arrangement, Eleanor reflected, watching Lily sleep peacefully beside the fire. It was in discovering that healing doesn't mean forgetting the past, but weaving it into a stronger future, Augustus finished, his hand finding hers as they watched the snow continue to fall, each flake unique yet part of the greater beauty outside their window.